welcome to the top-down allocation planning with Anaplan. Before we begin, I must advise you that today's webcast is being recorded and that all participants are in listen-only mode. Our presentation today will be followed by a question and answer session. To submit a question via the WebEx, please type it into the chat panel and submit to the host. Without any further delay, I'd like to hand the webcast over to your first speaker, Julia Honisberger. Please go ahead.
Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar on top-down allocations using Anaplan. My name is Julia Honisberger and I'm a principal consultant with Surrogate. I've been working in BI, analytics, planning and modelling for over 25 years now, so I'm hoping to bring some of that experience to this session today. A quick look at our agenda. For those of you who don't know Surrogate, I'm going to start with a quick introduction, followed with a similar intro to Anaplan for anyone who isn't familiar with the product and the technology. I'll then introduce today's use case with some details on the scenario that we'll be looking at, and I'm going to move fairly quickly onto a demonstration using Anaplan. I'm going to conclude with some considerations around the Anaplan platform before wrapping up and taking questions and hopefully giving some answers. So a bit of background on Surrogate. We're an independent consultancy and we specialise in BI, analytics, planning and modelling. And while we're technology independent, we do partner with those software vendors that we see as best of breed. And in the planning space, this would include people like IBM with their TM1 product, and certainly historically Cognos Planning, although that technology is becoming a little bit dated now. It's an interesting comparison between TM1 and Anaplan. They've got different strengths in different areas, so if this is something that you're interested in and would like our view on, just let me know. We also partner with SAP, who, having been faced with a plethora of planning products over the last few years, have singled their focus now onto BPC, and Oracle, who continue to deliver through the Hyperion Planning Suite and Essbase. But a new partner for Surrogate in 2014 is Anaplan, and I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about why we think it's such a strong addition to the planning landscape. As a business, we operate globally. We've got teams in the US, in the UK, and in Bangalore in India. And these teams provide a full range of services, BI, analytics, planning. And our main sectors of expertise really are around our strengths of experience in the consumer packaged goods sector, financial services, definitely including insurance and banking, along with the pharma and the healthcare markets. So I've pulled together here some examples of planning applications we've built to show really the breadth of planning apps across the various sectors. So in the insurance sector, we've got financial and business planning, reserving, and regulatory planning, things like Solvency II and Lloyd's submissions within the UK. For packaged goods, we're looking at gross margin planning, promo and volume planning, production, and an interesting exercise we did for a customer looking at the impact of tax changes on the manufacturer and the markets and the governments. And we've done planning applications for other industries such as the airline industry, where their direct operating cost model is very complicated, looking at the costs between airports and across all the different types of costs that are incurred. So quite a broad spectrum of planning applications. That's a bit about us, but if you want to know any more, take a look at the website www.surrogate.com. A bit about Anaplan. Well, this is actually their positioning slide from last year when we first partnered with them, and I think it brings out the key points. It is a relatively new company. It was founded in 2007 and officially launching in 2010. But in fact, it does come from the same creators as Cognos Planning, which was the Adatum product. So Cognos bought Adatum in 2003 and developed it into the Cognos Planning product. But the CEO and the chief developer of Adatum, amongst other team members, later reformed as Anaplan, so it comes from quite a strong pedigree. In terms of funding, the company is very well financed, and back in 2014 we were looking at $50 million in funding. They've just had their D round of funding, and that's gone up by another 100 million, so very well financed. And they're using that money predominantly to employ developers and engineers who are significantly adding capability to the product. So we see it as something that's really growing in its capability. And their user base has increased as well since last year. So last year we were looking at 15,000 engaged users. We're now looking at 35,000. So significant increases in the numbers of users who are using the product. In terms of the technology that Anaplan uses, it's software as a service. It runs everything in memory in the cloud, which makes it pretty scalable. And as software as a service, users really reap the benefits of the outputs of all of those new engineers because they do frequent release cycles and there's really minimal disruption to users. You log in on the day that the release has taken place and you get the features of that release. And Anaplan do quite a lot of work to ensure that full regression testing has taken place. So you should see minimum downside, maximum benefit. I'll talk a little bit more about the architecture when we look at other considerations later in the webinar. But let's have a look at the core of Anaplan. Well, there's a lot in Anaplan that you'd expect from a modern planning tool. It's got workflow, aggregations, pretty good calculation capabilities, and as we'll see today, a very strong breakback on allocations. It's got some specific intelligence which they call the core or the spine of Anaplan. It's built into its backbone. Things like special treatment of key dimensions, time for example, it's very time aware. You've got opening balances, you've got closing balances, you've got ability to recognise when actuals have run out and when you're kicking into forecasts. And it's got a lot of financial intelligence built in, things like rates of return MPVs, and that really allows you to build quite sophisticated financial planning models within Anaplan. On the look and feel side, its interface is pretty crisp and clear, and hopefully you'll see that today. And it's responsive, so as your screen shrinks and grows, you still get full access to the data on that screen. And it's mobile enabled, iOS, Android, Windows, you get all of that capability. And on the graphics front, well, it's definitely fit for purpose. The waterfall chart shown here is very easy to build in Anaplan, and that's something that in other technologies I've had real problems in achieving. It's got maps and colour coding is pretty straightforward. It isn't high-end visualization, but then that's not really its scope. So any BI architecture would need to think about how it's going to deliver high-end visualizations and maybe in-depth analytics outside of Anaplan. If we look under the hood, Anaplan uses its Hyperblock technology. This slide is actually from Anaplan's website, and you can go and read up a bit more. But this Hyperblock technology sits in memory, and this enables it really to scale to hold billions of cells and still be pretty performant. And that's very important within planning and modelling scenarios. I think that's because modelling applications are often quite onerous in what they do. You make a small change and that can often impact a large number of data points. And top-down allocations is a real case in point there. And it's really important when using a tool like Anaplan that the changes that result from a user putting something in are available fast if they're going to understand what's the impact of what they're doing. So it really does have to be fast. And Anaplan does this by leveraging a lot of dedicated hardware that's optimized for the in-memory nature of the product. And I think that really is one of the key benefits of running something like Anaplan as software as a service. You don't have to worry about the infrastructure and the hardware. That's taken care of. That was a real whistle-stop tour on Anaplan, but if anybody has any questions, as I think it's been mentioned, use the chat panel to pose a question. But I'm going to move on now to look at today's scenario of top-down allocations. So we're going to be working in a consumer packaged goods company. So they make products in things like the hair care sector, the skin sector, the sun sector. And we're going to assume that an element of bottom-up planning has already taken place. So product owners have entered their volume plans for 2015 for each of the countries. We'll have a brief look at workflow, although it's not the main topic for today. But the next job, the job really that needs to be done now, is for managers at the category and the brand levels to be able to add their perspective on those volumes. So looking at aggregate levels depending on their role, putting in things like annual totals, category totals, really looking at existing profiles and using that to reflect that across other products within their portfolio. And as I mentioned, we've got two different perspectives today. There's a category manager's perspective who's focused on growing his category, and that includes a portfolio of brands. The second manager is going to take a more brand-focused view, so his brands span many categories. So we can see here that the free hair product is sitting in the hair care category and in the free brand. And we're going to have a look at how we reconcile these two perspectives. Okay, let's move over to Anaplan and have a look at how the product handles these scenarios. So this is Anaplan running through a web link. I'm going to log in. And what I'm presented with is a list of all of the applications or the models that I've been given access to. You can choose the order that they appear here. They can be in a list or they can be in this sort of metro interface look. It can be sorted alphabetically. In this particular instance, it's sorted according to when I last accessed the model. And I can do things like decide which applications are the most pertinent to me. So I can favorite applications by clicking in the top corner, and I can limit down my list only to those items that are favorites. So a pretty nice way of being able to see what I can get to. The one that I'm going to work on today is the Allocations webinar application. So I just click on it and I'm taken into the model. There we go. So this front screen is pretty customizable based on user profiles and security. As an administrator of this model, I have full access. I can even click over to a settings tab where I can see the basic that spine of Anaplan and start to do some changes. But as a user, you'd be focused on something like this setup screen. And what you see on this screen can be driven by what's important to you. So I've set up a number of perspectives or views for the webinar today. There are some other areas down here. And down the bottom, as the administrator, I've even got access to the models themselves. On the right-hand side here, we can see some workflow in action. So in this particular model, workflow has been set up on the country dimension. And we can see here, if I expand EMEA and Western Europe, that France has completed its submissions for this period, and they've done that by flagging them as complete. The UK and Netherlands are still in progress. Everybody has actually started. And once a country is happy, and for the person who has the authorization to do this, they can just say that their submission is complete, and at that point their traffic light, if you like, goes green. At that point their data is locked and it can't be changed. So as the Western Europe manager or owner, if I wanted to do any further changes, and today's topic is very much around top-down allocations, if I wanted to do some top-down allocations around the Western Europe section, they would all go to the UK at the moment because the Netherlands and France data is locked. While that data is unlocked, any allocations will be allocated in a pro rata fashion. I can do things like email people if they haven't, I can prompt them and those sort of things. Not going to talk much more about workflow today, but as I say, it is built into the product and it's pretty useful. What I'm going to do today is look at some allocations at aggregate level within Anaplan. And I'm going to start off at the category level, but I'm just going to open up this Reconciliation tab, really to have a look at how it looks before we do any of those top-level changes. So I've got here a series of columns of data at a category perspective, and a set of columns on a brand perspective. And as I start to do my top-down allocations, those two data sets are very much in line, in sync, and I have zero differences. What we're going to see as we move through the webinar is that differences will be introduced. I'll be able to identify those differences and reconcile them. But for now, I'm going to go back to inputting data at the category level. So here we can see I've got a grid showing products down the left, months across on the columns, and I've got a selector here. I can start to input and choose a different particular profile, a different category. So I'm in the sun care category here, and I've got 3 products: Sun Defense, Sky Sun, and Hydra. It's a fairly seasonal category, definitely peaking around the June, July, August time. A bit more about the way Anaplan highlights where you can and can't input numbers. Anaplan shows numbers that you can type over in blue. So we can see there from February through to December at the product level I can enter numbers. That's because those are leaf level numbers. Now if this went right down to SKU level, for example, we could either display it at SKU level, or those numbers would be top-down allocations from product down to SKU as well. But for this demonstration, I'm saying that my leaf level is the product level. If you can't type into a number, then Anaplan shows it as black. So we can see here that January 2015 is black, which means I can't type into it. And the reason for that is because Anaplan is pulling actuals through. I have actuals available for January, and Anaplan's pulling those through, and it's really easy for all of your modules and screens within your application to pull that through with a single flag saying when the switchover is between actuals and forecasts or plans. My aggregate totals, my yearly totals, and my category totals are also showing as black. But the difference is that they've got a little blue corner in the top left. And what that's showing me is that although that's a calculation, if you like, it's an aggregation, breakback has been enabled. And that means that I can put in a number, and when I put that number in, the difference will be allocated across the children within that group. So as the simplest example, sun care 53.16, if I maybe make that 60, I should see the Sun Defense, Sky Sun and Hydra figures all increasing a small amount to take account of that difference. I could increase an annual total for a product. That's the sort of thing maybe that a product owner would do. Or I could overwrite the annual total for the whole category itself. And one of the quite neat features about Anaplan is that if I was a category manager and I thought, I actually think we're going to do better in this category, but we're not going to start really promoting until, say, May, I could take those Feb, March, April figures and I could hold them. In other words, I could lock them and say, don't make any changes to those figures. It's not going to make any changes to the actuals anyway. But if I now upweight this to, say, 2000, what I'll see is that those Feb, March, April figures remain the same, but all the other figures change to take account of the difference. So quite a nice way for me to ensure that Anaplan's taken care of all of the underlying allocations. But sometimes things get a little bit more complicated than that, and I'm going to go to a second screen now and input some data by a profile. So what I've got here is I've got a very, very seasonal product. We can see that because on this one I'm actually showing the last 3 years worth of data, but only this latest period through from February through to December is what I can change. The rest is actuals. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new product into this mix, and I'm going to call it New Sun, and I'll add it at the end just to keep things tidy. So I've got a new product built in here, and now if I go back to my previous screen I can see a completely blank line. And I think that my totals for this particular product for the year, I'm reasonably optimistic, 500 as a volume. Now what Anaplan's done is, because it knows no better at this point, is it's allocated that with equal numbers going into every month. But I know that this is a fairly seasonal market. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I could take, for example, the Sun Defense profile and use that profile, not the actual figures themselves, but the profile of that product, and use that profile into my New Sun product I could pick it up from a different market, maybe if they'd done it first. I'll come back to time lagging in a minute. So at the moment, I've got a relatively straightforward forecast. If I profile that data, it's going to run a little routine which is going to copy over the profile. And now we can see I've got my nice seasonal pattern for this new product, but I've retained that 500 volume that I wanted to feed in. And now if I want to change that volume, it's going to do it in that seasonal profile that we saw before. If I go back, I could change to maybe the hair care category. And what we can see here is I've got a new product. I'd added that before just to save a bit of time. And again, that's a new product, and I really want to be able to learn from past experience and other products. So again, I'm going to go back to my profiling screen. And this time I'm going to, for example, use this slightly upward trend that I'm seeing. But in fact, I do know that the urban hair product was launched back in July of 2013. So that's a nice pickup for a new product within this sector, and therefore that's what I'd like to use for my new hair care product. So in this time I can choose urban hair as my source profile. I'm going to copy that into my new hair product. Let's put that on the screen while we have a look at it. So at the moment it knows no better. And I'm going to pick it up from 2 years ago, 24 months ago. So go back 24 months, take the urban hair profile and apply that to my new hair product. And again, I think I could be selling 500 volume for that product. If I profile that, what I can see is I've now got exactly the same pickup profile that Urban Hair had, but it's using my total that I've put in for this year. So some different ways really of inputting data at a top level, not only by the existing profile of the underlying data, but also by some alternate profiling methods. So I've input all my data by category, and now I might want to go and see what the impact on that is versus reconciling it. Now, before we had a nice green screen here. What we can see is wherever I've put a number in, there's now a difference between the category perspective and the brand perspective. And I'm actually going to cheat here. I'm going to be a brand manager, and I've built a fairly simple screen here, but just to show that I can do the same sort of thing against brand. So I've got a number of brands that cut across categories. I've got Free, Sky and Urban. And on this Free brand, I can see that I've got something from the hair care category and something from the skin category. And once again, in exactly the same way as I could with categories, I could key in a total that I'm expecting that brand to achieve. Again, I might want to hold some periods because I know I'm going to do a big marketing campaign partway through the year. So I could lock anything prior to that period and make sure the allocation was allocated to the second half of the year. But for now, I'll just put that in. So once I've done that, I can go and look at my reconciliation screen. So what I've got now is that I've got some differences. I've put a color coding really on the size of the difference. So everything in green hasn't been touched, and therefore they're still very much in sync. I've got some small differences introduced here, and obviously for those two new products, there is no figure in the brand perspective because the category manager added those products. And at that point, I can start to resolve some of these differences. Now, what we've done here, in order to keep a level of auditability, is I've actually locked the actual volume figures, so they don't have that little top left-hand blue flag, but I've introduced an adjustment column. So to get to removing any of the differences, I'm going to feed in deltas into that adjustment column. So the most obvious one would be maybe in this new sun area that the brand manager wasn't aware. He says, okay, I accept that that is going to occur. He acknowledges the difference and maybe adds a column, new product, not previously planned. So now I've got a nice audit trail, not only of the number, but also some context that that change happened in. And I'll just do that quickly with the other product that we added to get rid of those two. On the free skin product, I've got a difference because the brand manager upweighted his perspective. So either the category manager could accept that difference of 143, or the brand manager could reject it. In this instance, the category manager is happy with that. Some comment to reflect. And I can continue to refresh this screen, which will just reapply the sort, if you like, continually getting rid of any of these variances. So quite a neat way to manage differences between different perspectives, to capture that from an audit perspective, and also to accommodate some commentary around why those changes occurred. Okay, I'm going to close these down now and go back to my home screen. I'm just really now going to look at some other areas of application in this model, really just to highlight a couple of things and look at another allocation scenario where it's really starting to get a bit more complicated what it's doing, but I think it's a good explanation. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to pick my hair care sector. So here I've used one of those neat waterfall charts, and this is a P&L perspective, so I can start to see what is taking me from my gross sales down to my profit. I've got things like cost of sales, discounts, etc. So a good way of looking at it. But I'm still ahead of target. My sales gap is looking very positive. I'm going to go through and look at my volume plan. Now this is where Anaplan is letting you do some, if you like, what if on the data. So what we've got is we've got two drivers really that are going to influence my outturn. There's the market growth perspective and there's the market share perspective. And I can change some of these market growth figures. Do I think that a high market growth is going to be 3%, 4%, etc.? And I've also got some basis points for my market share that I could change. And then I can run a number of scenarios, picking up different options for market growth, market size, and for market share. So we can see here that a no change scenario would be flat growth and constant share. In other words, as is. But if, for example, I had to look at maybe a medium growth scenario, and I had a constant share of that, we can see that I would be benefiting from the growth of that market. Alternatively, if I had a flat growth in the market, but I had a high share, then again, I'm benefiting, I'm actually taking more from the market. And I can work all of those scenarios through. I've got a graph here, but I could actually be looking at the P&L and all sorts of things to understand what the effect of flexing those parameters was on what my likely outturn for the year would be. And we go back and we can have a look at the impact of that. Another neat feature of Anaplan is its ability to handle text and use color coding. And what I've got here is I've got all of my products that I can work with, and I'm categorizing them as challenging, entering, struggling, fading. And those color codings are set by these parameters here. So if my product share is greater than 4%, then I will be seen as a challenging product. We haven't got any, but if I change this, I sort of downweight my expectations a bit really, and make this 2%, we can see that a lot of the products change to be leading products. But for now, I'm going to leave it back at the 4%. Similarly, on the growth side, if my product has got a growth percentage of less than 1%, I consider it to be a struggling. If its growth is greater than 2.5, it is a challenger. So a great way of flexing how the business might look at products, and then we're going to move on now to use those categorizations to affect our advertising spend. So here we've got a chart with my products, and there it's pulled through those categories here. And I can actually decide how much of my advertising and promotion spend as a % of gross sales I'm going to spend on each of those leading, challenging, fading. So I've got 17% here. So anything that's challenging, golden locks, free hair, etc., are pulling through that 17%. If I change that and I edit it to say 15%, you'll see that those figures now change here. I can override that for golden locks, although it's a challenging product. I think it's actually going to need more spend, so I could up that to say 17% of the advertising and promotion spend, at which point it's starting to get an increased proportion of the pot that's available. But remember, I'm looking at a UK position here. I can also start to look at a global perspective, and I can say, actually, I'm going to spend maybe £10,000 dollars on advertising and promotion. So now we should see an increase to that golden locks line, 13,154. And it's gone up, and its share of the global budget is 2780. Based on an allocation profile of existing advertising and promotion spend. Well, I can change the method of allocation to be one of gross sales, and it gets a reduced figure, which is telling me that its advertising and promotion spend has been greater really in the past than its volume gross sales contribution has been. So lots of different ways of using top-down allocations along with what-if scenarios, along with neat ways of representing the data as categories, giving a lot of power to the user to change those numbers. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation now. So what we've looked at is how Anaplan handles top-down allocations with some effective ways of profiling that data to reduce the amount of reinvention really in the planning process. People don't have to continually re-enter profiles. They can copy them from other slices within the model. And we've seen how we can reconcile two perspectives and capture the results of that negotiation, both from an audit perspective with the numbers and with some commentary to make it more transparent. I've also done a bit of a sneak peek into some what-if analysis to give an additional flavour to what the product can do. So hopefully it's given you a good idea of the capabilities of Anaplan. There are a couple of other considerations I'd like to highlight before we close this webinar. So on the architecture front, security is always something that's a strong consideration when you're using any public cloud software. So if this is something that concerns you or your organisation, and I know particularly with financial organisations this is a major concern, I would probably encourage you to speak to Anaplan to understand all of the areas that they've addressed security in. I've got some of them up on the screen here so we can see things like selective access, model rollback, separate workspaces. It's got single sign-on. And it allows you to use your AD authentication to sign on. There's an interesting use case actually. An interesting customer for Anaplan was McAfee, whose whole business is based around security. And I believe they gave Anaplan quite a hard time making them prove that the security of their environment was robust before they purchased the software. But they did go ahead, and currently a big customer for Anaplan. So I think that's a good indication that the security in Anaplan is pretty robust. Other architectural considerations would include things like how you integrate software as a service with your other on-premise data, or even other cloud-based solutions, and where it sits in your BI architecture. So there's a number of technologies to help you with that integration. We've got JDBC, we've got SnapLogic and Dell's Boomi technologies, and all three can be used to help you integrate data across your organisation. In terms of scope, Anaplan is pretty much not restricted by volume, but I think there is still a case for making sure that it's used correctly. And what I've done here is I've taken Surrogate's architecture diagram and I've highlighted in varying shades of green where I think Anaplan's sweet spot is. So, for example, consolidation, model definition, security, all pretty strong. Collaboration, we've seen with the reconciling, the ability to capture comments and things like that, it can really help with collaboration, and it's mobile. Prediction, you can build some prediction into it. We've seen some forecasts, fairly straightforward, and we're not talking about deep Holt-Winters forecasting techniques and things like that. It gets a green light, a pale green light on the data storage, because Anaplan does have a data hub that enables you to load data in and then farm that data out to your Anaplan applications. So you can make sure that everybody is using the same value for actuals, not everybody taking it from source. So some real strong spots, some areas where I think it's good enough, and some where there are other components within your BI architecture that you will need. So, with all of that, how do you get started with Anaplan? Well, Anaplan provides a number of blueprints and apps from its App Store. And so these are either templates that provide the broad framework to a common planning problem, or they might be even complete applications that address a particular area. So we can see here that we've got things like balance sheet and cash planning, capital expenditure, strategic planning, all sitting in the finance area. And in sales, we've got things like sales forecasting, territory planning. In HR, workforce planning, pensions, healthcare, those sort of things. So all of those templates are available, and you can take them as a starting point and then start to adjust them to cope with your specific scenarios. And the other way you can get going is to take the Anaplan Challenge. The Anaplan Challenge is provided by Anaplan and its partners to give some free time to customers, taking a subset of their data and a subset of their planning process and putting it into the model and allowing you to evaluate it. And if that's something you'd like to do, contact me and we can talk through the process in a bit more detail. And I think this quote from Warren Buffett really sums up what the Anaplan Challenge is all about. Explaining what it's like to walk really isn't a substitute for walking, and running any part of a business, including business planning, is really best experienced rather than discussed, and that's what the Anaplan Challenge is all about. That's all from me today around Anaplan. If you found the session interesting, we do have a number of events coming up over the next few weeks that you might also enjoy. We're running a number of events looking at how the click technology can be used. Interestingly enough, for those very eagle-eyed people, Click is actually a customer of Anaplan. They use it to do their planning. But how Click can be used in the insurance sector. So we have two events coming up there, February the 25th and 26th in Philadelphia and New York. We have one in the UK tomorrow actually, but it is full. But if anyone is interested in that topic, just let us know and we can talk through how we can make that content available for you. On the 24th of February in London, we have a session looking at planning in the insurance sector specifically using Anaplan. That's an afternoon briefing starting, I think, at 4, and that's running from the City in London. On the 26th of February in London, we'll also be running a workshop looking at self-service BI with Tableau. So I talked about Anaplan's visuals, pretty good, but not high-end. Tableau is one of those high-end visualization tools that can really fill a gap within your BI and analytics architecture. On the 3rd of March, we'll be running our Business Intelligence and Analytics Update. It's a morning seminar where we talk about lots of new things that we see coming out within the BI and analytics and planning space. That will be in London. And again, another webcast on the 5th of March looking at mobile BI and personal dashboards within the Microsoft toolset. You can find out any information on those events and register if you're interested by going to our website www.surrogate.com and looking at the events section. So I'm now done for this webinar, but if anybody has any questions, do raise them on the chat panel. We've had one question. It was raised earlier and I might have covered it, but I'll just go through it quickly, which was around how easy it is to get data in and out of Anaplan. And the answer is it's pretty easy, really. We looked at that profiling exercise that I ran. That was using an import functionality, importing actually from the model itself from a different slice. But it's got import and export. You can use text files. It's got a great GUI interface with colors to help you map things. There's also Anaplan Connect, which automates the imports and exports through a batch file, so that could be useful to you. And I did bring out towards the end using things like JDBC connectivity, and that's going to allow you to import directly from something like a relational data source. And also things like SnapLogic and Dell Boomi with their additional features. So I think it's pretty comprehensive to get data in and out of Anaplan. So I hope that's answered that question. So that's all for today. I hope you found it interesting. If you do have any questions, do get in touch and take the Anaplan challenge. Thank you.